Hi, everybody.
Hi,
I am
everyone.
I am so sorry. I'm trying not to blame myself. I'm going to blame Mercury, as Heidi suggested, since it is in retrograde today.
Again.
But no, there's a bit of an Eventbrite glitch with Zoom and connecting Zoom and all that kind of stuff. So thank you so much for joining. We're going to kind of get a slow start going so that we can wait for other people to get the link and join us. Kaylee's going to let everybody in as we go. Heidi, thank you so much for joining. You guys missed out. We were having a chat just before we let you all in. So I'm glad that you now also get to see Heidi's beautiful face. I am in Toronto. I'm going to welcome you to share a land acknowledgement from the traditional land you are joining us from today. If you feel comfortable, place that in the chat. But I am going to acknowledge the land where I am speaking to you from. I am in Toronto. I am sitting in Tikaranto, which for thousands of years has been the traditional territory of the Wendat Anishinaabeg Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. It is still home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community on their territory. I would like to, before I introduce Heidi and she shares with us her what she's reading right now, I want to make a public apology. I don't know if anyone noticed on Instagram and other social media posts that I referred to the book as Two White Queens and One-Eyed Jack a number of times. It is the One-Eyed Jack, the one and only Jack. So Heidi, I'm sorry for that.
That's fine. It's totally fine. Oh my goodness.
So, but while we're waiting for others to join us, I'm hoping that you will share with us what you're reading right now or a book that you recommend any of us.
Okay, well, I don't read fiction when I'm writing fiction. So I'm between books right now. So I'm reading fiction and I'm reading some poetry. And the fiction that I'm reading, I'd read the book as an arc, a digital arc, and now I have my hands on the newly released book, and it's a little embarrassing because I know that the writer is watching. However, also by Dundurn, Even So, written by Lauren B. Davis. And the thing about Lauren's writing, I think, is that she has a very a quiet and intense rhythm that strikes right at the heart. So it's a combination of deep thought, but also there's an emotional ride to all of her writing. I mean, the Grimoire of Kensington Market as well was like, it was a roller coaster, and The Empty Room, and there's so many great Lauren B. Davis books, and this one is fantastic. So I'm rereading it, enjoying it in a book. Another Canadian that I'm reading right now, my poetry book choice, is Shredding Plywood. Now, this is done by a very small press called Black Dog One-Eyed Press out of Nova Scotia. And I usually like formal poetry, but this is free verse, and some of it is just incredible. I mean, the phrasing's amazing. And this man I saw at the Pugwash farmer's market, and he was sitting there with a typewriter, and you could go up to him and you could just give him a word that was on your mind or something that you were going through, or just a word. And then he'd say, go away for 10 minutes. And then you'd go and buy whatever at the market, and you come back and he'd pull a poem out of the typewriter and he would announce it to everyone. He would, just say the poem and then give you the poem, and then you would give him a pay what you can. So he's a real poet, and he loves the word, and his book it's stunning. And there's paintings done by his partner all the way through.
Oh, wow.
So you get a real sense of where he is in Nova Scotia. And so it's a lovely little book. Yeah. So those are my two right now.
Yeah, my two daughters went to New York City once, and on the subway there was a poet sitting there with his typewriter, and I think they shared a couple of words about myself and a couple of words about my husband, and we got these two beautiful typewritten poems
It's
about
extraordinary
us.
because
It
I mean
was,
I think he had done 10 before I had gotten there, and he was
yeah.
still going and going. And and he said that he feels that it's somewhere between poetry and almost fortune telling, that he almost gives a message that you need to hear. And mine was actually redemption. It was
Oh, nice.
about, rising again, and that every day is a new breath and a new day and a new awakening. And it doesn't matter how much we impose on a new day, it's going to happen anyhow.
Mhm.
And so I wish I had the poem memorized. I would recite it, but I don't. So
And do you feel like it was connected to you personally at the time? Like you read it and thought, wow,
a
this
hundred
is,
percent,
yeah,
100%. Yeah,
that's
I
incredible.
was very, very touched by that poem, indeed.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And talking about free verse versus formal poetry,
Mhm.
you and your sonnets through
Yes.
the pandemic was an incredible thing to read. That was really, really
Oh, thank you.
a joy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I did a fundraiser for mesothelioma, and I said that for every dollar I would write a line of poetry, and I had no idea how much money I would raise. So I
Right.
think I'm gonna have to be writing a lot of poetry. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah.
I am not a poet. I have zero. I took both poetry classes that I could, but I didn't come out of it any better than I was when I went in.
You took a creative writing poetry class,
So
or
in both my York BFA and or my creative writing BA at York and at UBC, I took the poetry classes because I feel like I'm such a terrible poet that I thought I would learn something from it. But
but obviously you're attracted to poetry.
I love poetry. I grew up, my father loved poetry. We read poetry constantly and I love it, but I just have I don't know what it is. If it's like a self-doubt, fear, being able to connect really like truly to my emotions. I
Mhm.
don't know.
Well, people say that about singing. They say I can't sing. And then most singing teachers will say everybody can sing. You just haven't either found your voice, or you haven't found the technique. There's always a reason that one can't sing. A
Yeah.
teacher will never say, well, maybe you are tone deaf. But I think maybe it's the same thing. And I think confidence has a lot to do with it. I mean, I very rarely stray from the sonnet, right? I'll do all the different forms, right? And there's six
Right.
forms that I will explore. But I like
Because
those
you feel
14
comfortable in that
lines. I like
structure.
the bum 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 of the heartbeat of the iambic pentameter.
Hmm.
So I do stick with the sonnets. Yeah.
Nice. That might have a lot to connected to your acting too, in
Yeah,
learning to do
maybe. I
that
mean,
during.
certainly I would, certainly with Shakespeare sonnets, where that was where I got my toes wet. My mom bought me Shakespeare sonnets when I was very young, and so that was the first. But there were a lot of other forms that I came to like as much, if not more so. So this is why I'm doing 154,
Right.
because that's what Shakespeare did in his lifetime, and
Oh,
that's what I'm
really?
doing during pandemics. So
Oh, that's awesome. See, I did not know that. That's
mhm,
awesome.
154, yeah. But Rilke wrote sonnets too. And
Yeah.
when my dad was dying, I had a fantastic book of Rilke sonnets, and I had it on one side. It was in the German, which I would, struggle through and mispronounce, and then I had it
Mhm.
in a translation in the English. And whoever translated was brilliant, because they kept the form, they kept the right number of beats. Somehow they managed to make that work. It was quite extraordinary. So
Yeah.
Rilke's another great poet, great
Mhm.
sonnet writer. Yeah.
Yeah, and translation is an art form that just is honestly awe-inspiring.
Put in Google Translate, push the button, and there you
That's what I do. Yeah. Um, okay, thank you so much. I hope that we've gotten more people to join us. Kaylee, we're great. Thank you so much. Heidi, before we have the privilege of hearing you read from Two White Queens and The One-Eyed Jack, is it okay if I share your biography with everybody?
Sure, thanks.
Okay, great. Heidi von Palleske is an award-winning novelist, scriptwriter, and actor. Her first novel, They Don't Run Red Trains Anymore, was published in 2017 and it won the H.R. Percy Award. She has been a runner-up for both the Toronto Star Short Story Competition and the Poetry Guild Poetry Competition. Her short stories and poems have been published in Raskolnikov's Cellar, Beggar's Press, and Pottersfield Portfolio. Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack was published by Dundurn Press and has garnered great reviews in both Canada and the US. It has been called a literary novel of substantial merit by the Forward Book Review, and John Irving said it is a marvel of storytelling. It has been endorsed by none other than the novelist Lauren B. Davis, who's with us today, and she called it brave and bold and necessary. And Jeremy Irons has said, it captured me and I could not put it down. It was a Lone Stars, that's the Library Association's top 10 pick for new releases for 2021 winter release. The book was optioned and recorded for Tantor Media as an Audible book and scheduled to be released on October 19th. Narrated by Heidi herself. Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack has also been optioned by Academy Award-winning Bunbury Films for screen rights. Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack is also the first book in a Glass-Eyed trilogy, which I can't wait to talk to you about. Heidi, will you share some words with us?
Sure. So I usually like to start at the beginning of the book when I do a reading, but I realized that I haven't been reading about the two White Queens who are twins with albinism. So I wanted to give them a bit of time today. So the book starts off with a fall. A boy falls from a tree and he loses an eye. It has to be removed and a glass eye is put in. Well, not a glass eye, an artificial eye is put in. And it turns out that he's allergic to the material, which is acrylic. And the only place in the world that makes glass eyes is Germany. And so they have to go back to Germany in hopes to find an eye that the body won't reject. And at this point, he has had a sore, weeping eye for 5 years. He's 10 or 11 years old, and he has no hope. He doesn't think this is going to work because nothing's worked. And he's been teased and he's disheartened. And now he is about to meet the last great ocularist. Here we are. And this is from chapter 2. The boy looked 10 or 11 at most. His hair flopped over his high forehead. Siegfried noted the long limbs, the awkward body language, the shy and cautious smile when spoken to. Come over here, young man. Do you speak German? Jack shook his head no. Then I have a good chance to practice my English, but you must promise not to laugh at me if I get some words wrong. Jack lifted his downturned gaze and smiled openly at the older gentleman. It was only then that Siegfried could look into the boy's eyes, see his perfect hazel gray orb reflecting the light, while the dull acrylic replacement sat lifeless in the other socket. Now, I have a very important question to ask you. Jack was ready for this. The endless questions. What happened that day? Did they remove the eye right away? Was there ever an infection? Do you clean the eye regularly, properly? Do you feel pressure at the back of the eye? Any pain, discomfort, irritation, dryness? Jack knew all the questions and had practiced the answers over and over again. Do you eat marzipan? Because I have some. Jack smiled and nodded. The oculist reached over to Jack's ear and seemed to pull a red tinfoil wrapped chocolate out of nowhere. I will tell you a secret now. I once tried to be a chocolatier instead of an oculist, but it didn't turn out so well. Why not? Asked Jack. Well, because all my bonbons look like eyeballs. You see, we all have a destiny and you can deny it all you like. And when you do, life gives you a push. You are lucky. You got your push very early in life. I don't feel very lucky. Well, I didn't feel very lucky when my marzipan chocolates all look like eyeballs, but there you go. So what? You fell from a tree. So what? You have only one eye. It brought you to me, didn't it? And I just put the marzipan from your ear. You see? Destiny. Jack looked at the oculist for what seemed a very long time. He didn't want to admit that he didn't quite grasp the concept of destiny, unless destiny was part of the long list of things you could no longer do after you fell from a tree. I think I would love to eat marzipan eyeballs. Come, Let me show you something. Siegfried put a finger to his lips as he opened a steel drawer, the metal screeching against metal. He motioned for Jack to come closer, to peer inside. And 100 eyes stared up at Jack, each with a light of its own. They glowed, they reflected, they seemed to move when Jack moved. How was that even possible? You have lost your external sight in one eye, and for that you may mourn. But there are two types of seeing, my young friend. There is the outward looking and the inward looking. Now you must do both. You will appear to the world to be not quite as special as you are because no one else will know that you can see in two directions while most of us can see in only one. Now, we both have work to do. I will make you the best eye possible, and you will have to start doing the seeing, inward seeing. And that, my new friend, is called insight. Now we're going to move to chapter 3, and we're going to go into the home of the albinos, who are Clara and Blanca, identical twins. And their mother is kept in a facility, which is basically a psych ward, but a very nice one. They're little yellow cottages along Lake Ontario. And the girls are shuttled between grandfather and Uncle Bob. And the only joy they have in their life is going downstairs to a woman who has survived the Holocaust, Esther, who teaches them music out of the goodness of her heart. And so that's the only joy they have. They're terribly teased, and they just don't feel loved. Grandfather was ranting on about the evils of the world again. Nothing was safe. The police department was corrupt. The store down the street always ripped him off. The liquor bottles seemed smaller, and those city people who bought the house were putting up his rent. Why was the world conspiring against him? On your knees, girls. On your knees. It's time for a little God intervention. Clara and Blanca stopped rolling the ciggies. It was Blanca's turn to use the contraption, and Clara's turn to measure out the tobacco from their grandfather's pouch. A half a fistful would be good for 3. 3 at a time, rolled and twisted off until there were 91 in total, 13 for each day of the week. Girls, prayers now. Prayers, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and your mother's not getting any better neither. Oh, but you're safe with me. I'll take care of you. I mean, who else would want you? Look at you. He laughed at them. Now just get your little white asses off them chairs. We got some asking to do. The list was long. The people who needed guidance to see things the way he did. The obstacles that needed removing. A new adult-sized tricycle to replace the one that was stolen. Because I need it for business. No wheels means there's no supply for the demand. The twins slipped off their chairs and put their bare knees to the floor. Oh, and a little help with the racing bets. That would be nice too, he added. Clara reached for a nearby foam pillow to place under her bruising knees, and their grandfather saw her. Slapping the back of her head, he yelled out, "What in the devil do you think you're doing?" "Just trying to be a bit more comfortable," Clara answered him. Prayers are not about being comfortable. Prayers are to bring comfort. It's not about comfort for your body, but comfort for your soul. Clara had not been aware until then that her soul was in discomfort, but from that time on, she knew that fate had nothing to do with the white skin she wore, or her pink, anxious eyes, or even the bone-bleached natural color of her hair. Her discomfort was deep in her soul, and the only reason she looked the way she did was that her outward being was a reflection of what was wanting within. But how could she right the sin that was percolating through her DNA? Music. Clara understood that her ear for music had to be a gift from the angry God her grandfather wanted so badly to appease. And the only way to soothe him, to remove the mark that she and her twin bore, was to create a sound so original that they would blossom in color and purity. Blush would slowly come back to their cheeks. Their eyes would stop reflecting the pink of the blood vessels hidden behind the pale orbs, and their hair might even change from snow white to a pale yellow blonde. And maybe one day, maybe they might be like other girls. Maybe one day the stares would stop, the whispers would cease, and they could blend unnoticed. Clara and Blanca had been going downstairs to Esther's apartment, listening to music, training their voices, and sharing meals with the Perlmans for almost 5 years. And yet they still looked as though they had just emerged from a tub of bleach. Why? Why did you ever think that singing and playing piano would make us look like everyone else? Blanca finally asked her sister. I don't know. It just did. Well, maybe we can sing the way we do because we don't look like everyone else. But why do we have to pray so hard then? Because our grandfather is a mean and crazy old man. He wasn't always mean. The girls had seen moments of kindness, like buying them chips at the chip truck whenever they wanted. And almost weekly, they took stale bread to feed the ducks and the geese at the lake. That was him at his best. But then some memory would return. Someone would diddle him for a few dollars, or a cigarette wouldn't be rolled quite right, and this other man would emerge. The girls learned that it was best just to walk away, to slip out of sight, because the mere look of them would only escalate his self-pitying rage. And then he would say something like, oh, I guess you're going down to that woman downstairs again to have your heads filled with her highfalutin la-dee-das. Remember where you's come from, You're not bloody royalty, Miss Lady Janes, the both of yous. But that was just the point. Esther had told them not to slurp, just in case one day they were invited to Buckingham Palace. And that was why Clara believed that music would bring color, a painter's palette of color, into her soul. If she could use her music the way an artist does his paints, then that color would reflect in a prism of light radiating out of her. Come on now, girls, enough of your dilly-dallying. On your knees, the both of yous. You know, God listens even to the ugly ones, so you're okay. You're okay, so long as you stay pure of heart.
That grandfather.
That's grandfather, yep.
Yeeshka.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I love that you shared that scene. The scenes with the grandfather, despite him being the most
Charming man.
charming. Yes, love
And
that.
I forgot to say was that he, what he does for a living is
Yeah,
he rides his tricycle around town and he sells drugs to kids. That's that's what he does, right?
right.
And the girls believe all through their life that it's vitamins. So
That he's like a naturopath
yeah, there's a
riding
naturopath.
around town.
I got the things to get you up, kids. I got the things to get you down. Come on, Grandpa's got it all.
I have some questions for you. I hope that's okay. But I would like to welcome anyone who's here. If you have a question for Heidi, a question about the book, a question about writing, a question about life, maybe, feel free to ask Kaylee in the chat and she will ask on your behalf. But I would like to kick off the conversation, if that's okay. Writing a trilogy. As a writer, as a reader, I often think what writers think when they approach a trilogy. Like if you sit down and you structure all 3 books before you start the first, or if you know the foreshadowing and the little hints that you're going to drop in the first book and what you're going to leave for the second book. So I would love to talk about writing the trilogy and how you sort of thought about the story, the big story, and all the little stories.
So first of all, when I decided to write a trilogy, then I thought I was mad. That was insanity, right? What are you doing? And what if no one wants the second book? Then you've written it for nothing. And what if people don't like the first book and you've started the second book? So the first thing that happened was I was filled with doubt. But I didn't write Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack believing that it would be a trilogy. I thought it would be a one-off. And I had so many people say to me, I just don't feel like I'm finished with the characters. And I didn't feel like I was finished with the characters either. And some of the characters who show up a little bit later in the book became my favorite characters, and they didn't have much of a voice. So someone like the punk baroness, who you meet near the end, becomes much more prominent in book number 2. And so I knew that they hadn't finished talking. The characters hadn't finished talking. And then it was a question of how will things in book 2 and book 3 come back, to tie in with book 1, but also be able to stand on their own. So my attempt is to create 3 books that can stand on their own,
Right.
but also work together. And so characters will echo through the 3. And today I had a big, oh, I know what I'm doing with book 3. So that was great. And even during book 2, I knew some of the things that would be resolved in book 3. But uh, I find that I do create characters who are very stubborn, and they sometimes have a different idea of where they're going, what they're doing than what
Mhm.
I do. And so sometimes there's a bit of arguing with them, and they're inevitably they're always right. So
Right. That your art, your creation, your yeah, coming back at you, your monsters coming
that's
back.
right. You're
Yeah.
self-made monsters and friends, and
Yes.
friends too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that I mean, that's another thing about Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack is everybody, I mean, even the grandfather, the way that he speaks, his voice kind of lovable.
Yeah, and the grandfather, I mean, he has an arc, right? He's not just
Yeah.
one thing all the way through, and he has a surprising switch in the end, which I won't say,
Mhm.
but even the grandfather had, and the girls may not feel loved because they don't have their mother, but as best as he can, the grandfather loves them,
Mhm.
and so he loves them to the best of his ability, which is maybe not as much as the girls need, but he is still loving to the best of their ability, and he's providing for them with the drugs he sells. So come on.
Well, yeah, and I mean there's I can't remember what writer I talked to about this, but that idea of parents, parents or guardians taking care of children they act like they hate, and
Yeah,
just the act of caring for them is an act of love,
yeah.
whether the psychological damage is insufferable or not.
Mhm.
What I'm the reading the acknowledgments. I'm not sure if everybody here reads the acknowledgments. Sometimes I read them first. Sometimes I read them before I even decide to read a book. But in the acknowledgments, and this is incredible, you say that the final draft was in fact pretty darn close to the first draft, which
Yeah, that was never supposed to be in the acknowledgement. So you got that in the arc, right? So
I
that's
did.
not out there for everyone. But yes, it's true.
Sorry, everybody.
But that's not to say that the story wasn't with me for a long time. So I started the book. I started the book the day the Toronto Arts Council grants were due, and I'd helped 4 writer friends do theirs, and I had nothing,
Right.
and so I felt like I'd helped everyone and put nothing in myself, and I thought, "Oh, I'm going to try to write something." And I think I started 6 things, and I left my house in frustration, and I walked 1 block, and I just had the image of a boy falling from a tree. And then I turned the corner, and I only have another block to go before I get to my cafe. And I had the image of 2, twins with albinism, flash into my head.
Mhm.
And so I got to the cafe, and I ordered a very large latte, and I wrote 5,000 words flat out, and I stuck it into the Toronto Arts Council, and I
Wow.
forgot about it. And then I got the grant, which means I had to write the book. So I knew, and I had a certain amount of time to do it. And but from the time I wrote those first 5,000 words, I kept thinking, why are these characters coming to me? Why is this boy? Why is And my first book was very personal, very it was done in first person. It was almost like telling a secret. And so this was immense because it's stories that intertwine.
Mhm.
And so the intertwining stories were coming to me, and then by the time I got to Christmas, I think I had done only maybe 10,000 words. And then I went on a very, very strict writing schedule for Lent.
Mhm.
And, so I wrote every single day without fail. And so the book was really with me for quite some time. And yeah,
Mhm.
it came out pretty close to what everyone's reading. It really did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's incredible given the number of characters and the unique voices that exist inside of it. Like for you to just sit down and come up with the language that so accurately and beautifully reflects their lives is
Thank you.
incredible. Yeah,
Thank
really
you.
impressive.
Yeah. I think that, okay, so sometimes I feel that people discriminate against actors who are writers, particularly female actors who are writers. And I do think that my years as an actor has
Mhm.
given me a bit of an ear for the different rhythms that people use when they speak, and dialects and language. And so I really made an effort to make sure that the characters didn't sound like each other, that
Mhm.
everyone had, their own voice. And I think that, the years of playing different characters, and I am in many ways a character actor. So I think that playing different characters allowed me to be aware of different rhythms and
Yeah.
tones and speech patterns. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, it's quite successful here. And I actually thought and again, it's not my reader who was doing the thinking, it was my writer who was doing the thinking. When I was reading the book, I actually thought, I wonder how much of her acting training, her acting experience was brought into the development of the characters, because it seemed evident to me that they were all just very accurately drawn. If accurately doesn't seem like the right word for beautifully drawn, but
Yeah, and I think maybe some of it's subconscious, but I think that when you play a character, especially in film,
mhm,
you're not given a backstory.
no.
You're given just and you're not even given the thoughts, right? You're just given what they say and what they do.
Mhm,
And the rest is up to you. You have to breathe life into that character. And so an actor very often creates the rest of the story that you're never going to see on screen, but it is in that creation that you give a full performance.
yeah.
And so I think that I think that did help me a lot. I think it helped a lot.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was clear. I also want to talk to you, and I know in speaking to you about the trilogy, there is some back and forth historically,
Mhm.
but this novel, Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack, exists in a 20-year or so period,
Yeah.
after 20 years after World War II. And it didn't feel, you know how sometimes if you read a historical novel, you feel like the history or the history is kind of a character in and of
Yes.
itself.
Yeah.
I didn't feel that with Two White Queens and a One-Eyed Jack. I really did feel like I was living in the right historical time, and yet I wasn't overwhelmed with the history, if that makes any sense.
Hmm.
So I wanted to talk to you about how you balanced the research, because there are some historical moments that I imagine
Sure. Yeah.
required
Yeah.
research, and your experience, because again, the girls live in an area of Toronto that sounds similar to where you grew up.
Mhm.
So I want to know, as a writer, how you balanced those two, and brought such a believable, almost invisible space, I guess.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to do was to have a sense that all of our stories are kind of interconnected. I could do something walking down the street that you see, and it could affect something else you do that I will know nothing about.
Mhm.
And so I wanted there to be at the same time the individual's journey combined with the sense of society, or a sense of all of us being, like a tight fabric, right? But we're all threads of that fabric.
Yeah.
So that was one of my goals. And then of course, there was all that talk about walls going up. So I wanted this to culminate in a time when we were looking at more of a global community, a more optimistic time. And that was my voice against the fact that we were all, starting to put up boundaries again.
Yeah.
So that was very important to me. And so on a personal level, yeah, I grew up in Whitby, on the shores of Lake Ontario, and on a farm. And there were just there's a marsh, Lynn Creek Marsh, and across that marsh there really were cottages where women who were having a hard time dealing with their lives could stay, and it was part of the Whitby Psych. And there would be so many times at school where someone would go, someone's escaped from the psychiatric hospital, and we would all be panic, thinking that we didn't really know that they were just people who were either dealing with
Mhm.
PTSD or just, depressed or anxious, or, we thought that they were, insane criminals who were going to murder us, of course.
Yeah. Well,
And
that's
we didn't talk
exactly.
about mental health back then, no one did. And so, you always jump, and I think that I always jumped to the worst case scenario anyhow. So, there was that. And so that memory of those cottages,
Mhm.
it did come into the story. And, and then, my father was a German immigrant. And, and a lot of that was very important to me. And partly because as I grew up, I heard stories all the time from my mom and my grandmother. So my lineage from my mother's side was much more prevalent, and in many ways, I felt more Irish than I did German.
Mhm.
And but I was also teased. My sister and I were bullied and teased because of our German name, and my Heidi's even more German than Aurora. So
Right. Yeah.
so there was teasing, because we're that generation that's not that much, after, like, fathers were in the war,
Mhm.
and so I think I spent a lot of time sort of denying the German, even though, Heidi von Palleske can't sound, pretty German. you know, um, and so I think that played into it as well. And it's interesting because, when I recorded this and I read through it, this was written after my mom and my dad both passed away. And it wasn't until I read it out loud in front of the microphone that I realized how much both of my parents kind of influenced this book.
Nice.
There's a lot of my dad and Hilda,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of me and Hilda, but there's a lot of my dad in Hilda as well, and maybe a little bit of my grandmother in her, and there's a lot of my grandmother in Faye, of course.
Mhm.
But the difference being that, my grandmother was, she was a warrior woman. She was, we all called her the war horse because, she was the matriarch and she was so strong. So, she was a real survivor. But, I do mention my grandmother in my dedication.
Mhm.
And so there's elements of people I know, but none of the people are exactly,
Yeah.
one person that I know.
Yeah. Which is what I am at. I was just going to say about Faye. What struck me when you're talking about the yellow cottages and the fear triggered by the stigma of the time of
Mhm.
people there, that Faye, and it makes sense now knowing she's inspired in part by your grandmother. I
Yeah.
felt so much empathy and love, and especially the relationship between her and Elaine, I thought was so beautiful. And
Mhm.
my entire family's in healthcare, so
Oh,
that connection with patients, I just thought was you did such a great job with her.
and so, the question of it making it historical is that,
Mhm.
Faye she is suffering from PTSD, and, something's happened to her, and people don't believe her because it's easier to not believe than to
Mhm.
believe. And by making it a historical novel, I can look at the system now and go,
Mhm.
has it changed? Has it changed that
Right.
much? Is a victim believed? So there is that. How are we dealing with people with PTSD now? Because
Mhm.
back then they didn't really understand it, but we understand it better now. And but are we still giving what we need to give in these situations?
Right. Yeah. No, I thought that was really well done, and I looked forward to seeing the influence of that character and her experiences on all the other characters.
Mhm. I mean, she's not in there that much, but she
No.
touches everybody. I mean, she
Mhm.
touches Gareth in a huge way. She touches, well, the twins are hers, of course, and
Mhm.
my mom, my aunt were identical twins too, right? So, and when you have when you're raised by two moms who look the same,
Mhm.
it's a different experience than, I think, someone who was, raised by one mom. So,
Right.
so that whole twin experience is very much, in there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was good. We've got three questions so far.
Right?
So I will selflessly hold my questions back and open it up, Kaylee, to the gallery, to our audience.
Yeah, our first question. Our first question comes from Lauren. And Lauren says, Heidi, you've been interviewed quite a bit for this wonderful novel. Is there anything you wish someone had asked but hasn't? If so, what is it? And could you answer it for us?
Well, actually, just talking right now about the PTSD, because that's something that hasn't come up. But the other thing that no one's asked me about is the twins with albinism, and no one's asked me about the fact that I think I've created, real flesh and blood girls. And if you look at the history of albinos in film and in literature, they're
Mhm.
almost always portrayed as villainous or they're fetishized. In Okay, so between 1960 and 2003, there were 68 movies with albinos, and in all of those films, they were portrayed as soulless, murderous, or insane. And I've racked my brains to think of a film where albinos were, ingenues, love interests, heroes,
Mhm.
and they're not. And so no one's asked me about, why. And the thing is when I started to find out about the persecution of albinos,
Mhm.
it really affected me. And so, no one's asked me about, why albinos, and why I have such love for these two girls, and I
Mhm.
do. And I kind of wish that someone had, because I think it's important that we take a look at the fact that they are discriminated against, and that they have a tough go, and that they are murdered in some countries just for the color of their skin, or the
Mhm.
lack of color, and that they have been portrayed in a very irresponsible way, I think, in the media, and not portrayed as real beings. And so I wish someone would have asked me about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an important thing for me. I'm sure it's an important thing for other people. But I have a son with a facial difference, and
Mhm.
so I have been part of a big movement of families and people with kids with facial differences trying to fight the Hollywood representation of villains with facial differences. It's like
Yeah.
every single Marvel movie, the bad guy's got a facial scar or facial to use the word deformity. So I loved that Clara and Blanca exist in this book. And when I found out that it was optioned for a movie, I immediately thought, yay, we're going to have
Yeah.
two different looking people, the heroines,
Mhm.
and not just in like a, magical way, but real talented artists and
Yeah.
strong women and with incredible voices, both singing and just intellectually uh, strong voices.
And they have struggles, right? I mean, not only
Yeah.
because of their past, but also because of how they're perceived,
Mhm.
right? And they're not. I mean, I don't hide that. I mean, they, in a sense, even when Gareth perceives them, and he thinks of them as fairies, there
Mhm.
is a sort of, because they're different, right? There's an attraction because they're different, and I'm not sure that all attraction isn't a little bit of a fetishist thing, but we have that. But we have both Jack and Gareth find them very, compelling and beautiful. And for Jack, it's their talent. When he hears them sing, it's the siren song. For Gareth, it's their magical quality that he perceives. And he's a little kid, right? So
Yeah.
he doesn't know at that point. But you have all the way through the uncle and the grandfather calling them ugly little things,
Mhm.
So you have the two sides right there. And so, but I really wanted, and the other thing I wanted to do with them was that there's also something happens with twins where people just see them as the twinnies all their lives. And so I wanted to differentiate them as they got older,
Yeah.
and make them their own beings. But they're more the twins when they're younger, and they start to grow into their own women. So
Mhm. Yeah. And they end up having very distinct personalities, not just in life, but on stage when they're
mhm,
performing. So that does come across. They're each their own woman in the end.
yeah. And then
Um,
we use Antigone as something that they use as a performance, right? And we we use Antigone, but we use twins as Antigone. So Ismene and Antigone become kind of two sides of the same person. The one that is obedient and the one that wants to make things right, and the one that wants to survive, and the one who will fight at all costs, even if it means death. So we use that play as an opera, as a way of looking at two sides of of the coin, and how does that affect these girls.
Yeah, no, it was good. Kaylee, two more questions.
Yeah, our next question comes from Libby, and Libby says, your research is extraordinary. Tell me about your process. Did you go to Germany, or is that from memory? And the glass blowing, just tell us a little more about that.
Okay, so I have been to Germany 4 times, and I have German relatives, of course, and so yeah, so a lot of that comes from the memory of my travels to Germany. But then I also have a secret weapon, which is my cousin Frauke, who reads my drafts, and she tells me, oh, you forgot an umlaut here, and oh, this isn't spelled right, and maybe you want this. So I do put everything through her to make sure. The eyeglass blowing stuff, I don't know why I'm fascinated by it, but I just I am. Eyes have always been a thing for me. I used to have a fear. I think I said this before, of a vacuum cleaner sucking at my eye, so I never vacuumed. Yeah. So I would sit there in class holding my eyes like this, just in case they fell out. I just thought my eyes were going to fall out of my socket when I was a kid. So eyes have always been a big deal. And I did know a boy with a glass eye, and I was frightened by it as a child. And so I guess those things echoed into it. But then then I did a lot of research. And I watched glass blowing, and I watched all kinds of films of making glass eyes. And then I read a book about the history of the glass eye, and how various countries did it until it was only Germany doing it. And in fact, I mean, I think I said this in the book, but I'm not sure, but it's an interesting little fact that during the Second World War, of course, people were losing limbs and eyes, and Germany provided eyes for the world, and then Germany said no more. So German soldiers would get a glass eye, and the Allies would just have an eye sewn up or a patch, and that's why the acrylic eye came to be, because in the States they went, why do we make eyes out of the same things we make dentures out of? So the acrylic eye took off at that point. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. Yeah, that I found the blowing of the glass of the eye so fast. Like those parts I read over and over again, because I just really couldn't get the idea that this beautiful,
I know, it's like a work of art, right? Because you have to
Mhm.
inlay each piece of glass. I mean, you have to think about that, and so it's very important. And then I created Siegfried, who wants to make sure that they're perfect, and he has his own struggles.
Yeah.
He doesn't have an heir, and the glass eye makers are passed down from generation to generation. You can't go to college and just become a glass eye ocularist. You learn it through it's passed down. So so he has his own deal as well. Yeah. But I wanted, but he's very precise about everything, right? He's like, and even how he deals in his relationships, everything's very precise. And so that's echoed in how he makes those eyes.
Yeah. No, that was good. Next question.
So our next question in the queue comes from Tom, and Tom says, curious if Heidi agrees with Alison's reflection on a notion that caring for a child is in itself an act of love. How might this apply to Clara and Blanca's mother's love?
Well, their mother is damaged, and she is given treatment, and her thinking is a little mixed up. She wants so badly to be able to be normal and to have her girls, but she can't, and no one will allow her to, and that's her downfall, really, in the end. But she she questions how she even got pregnant. And she has this whole mythology about she swallowed a star and the star broke into two, and it was a beautiful white star. And when her twins are together, they're whole again like a star. She creates this whole mythology so that it can be something beautiful, so that she's able to better love the girls.
Mhm.
But interestingly, it's Esther who sort of steps up to the plate as a mother for them. And here's a woman who can't have children, who doesn't have children, who lost her own parents, during the war. They were rounded up and she escaped. And so she believes that everything and everyone she loved was taken away from her. And here are these two girls who are feral and badly mannered, and she invites them in. And I don't think that she creates them, but she allows some of the things that are holding them back to be taken away, so that they can really discover who they are. So I do have a little bit of the act of mothering when the child's not necessarily yours, and I think that's very possible. I think that we can love and we can mother, even when that child isn't necessarily a biological child.
Mhm.
So,
That's so lovely.
mhm.
Yes, Kaylee, one more. I'm conscious of the time, so I just want to make sure that we're giving everybody an opportunity.
Yeah, there are two more. I've closed the queue for now, but there's two more to wrap us off. So Kat asks or says, Heidi, at the beginning, you mentioned confidence is key, even in writing. During your readings, I could hear your confidence in your voice. As a writer who wants to put themselves out there, how does one increase their confidence in their writing?
Well, there's a whole 10,000 hours thing, that they say. And honestly, Kat, people just go, well, you were an actor first, or you're more of an actor than you are a writer. But if I actually sat down and counted up the number of hours, I probably have spent a lot more time writing than acting, because jobs are few and far between as an actor. But I think it's really important to just do it and do it and do it. And the other thing I like to do is to read everything out loud, because when I read out loud, then I'm aware if I'm overusing a word, and I'm aware of the pace and the tone of the whole thing. And I think that when you read something out loud, especially in the early stages, you really get a sense of what your voice is. And recording this was interesting, because I hadn't really read the book again for 2 years.
Mhm.
And so I think that all my books I'd rather do as an audiobook first, and then put it out there. I honestly do, because you do hear things. So I think that that's important. And then there's nothing like little victories. So write short stories, or poems, or whatever you want to write, and get them published, get people reading them, so that so that you get some feedback. And so yeah, write for whoever, for a literary journal, anyone that will publish what you're writing. And just get your stuff out there. And then don't second guess them. Oh, the other big thing is, when you ask people to read your things, everyone will have an opinion.
Mhm.
So only really pay attention if two or three people say the same thing, because it's really easy to become insecure about what you're writing. And then you tend to change it up and change it up, because you think everybody knows better than you do. And they don't. But if you have a few people saying the same thing, you need to look at that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would put your writing in front of somebody and ask, if you have a reader, ask them to say 3 great things and 1 bad thing. And
That's a good way to do it. Yeah.
yeah, and you'll get all of the ego feedback that you need, but also that one little thing that makes you think. Okay, Kaylee, can we do one more question, or maybe we have time for 2 more questions? Heidi, how's your time?
My time's good. I've got a cup of tea
Okay,
with
all right, then
my
we'll
2 white queens and 1 Jack
I
mug.
I saw all that stuff that you had. I just like, I want a mug.
You know what? I think if I like the title, right? I think that if it was a different
Yeah.
title, I wouldn't have done so much bling. But also, we were in pandemic, and I was really feeling like I was in a vacuum. And so I did the masks. I thought, if we have to wear them, I may as well
Yeah.
be a walking billboard. And then the mugs, and then then it just didn't stop.
Right. Like the bad thing if you get on Vistaprint and you start going, I'll take the pens too.
Oh,
I'll take
Vistaprint is
a-"
like, it's my go-to place, but oh my
Yeah.
goodness, it's like, again, then they ask you, do you want a pen? This is
Yeah.
what the pen looks like. Look how nice that pen looks with this title on it. Do you
Yeah.
want a travel mug now? How about a t-shirt? The
Sure.
things just keep coming up, right? And it's like,
Exactly. What about an apron? Would you like an
Oh,
Sure, I'll take
how
an
about if
apron.
we give you a deal on that apron?
Yeah.
Right? That's what they do. They get
I
you.
know. I know. Okay, Kaylee.
Yeah. So we have a question from Laura Robinson. It says, first of all, bravo and congrats. You are so
Thank you.
amazing. Can you tell us anything about the movie, about your dream cast?
Oh,
Ooh.
I can't really, but I will say this one thing. And I did send 2 books to his agents and I didn't hear anything back. Like way back, I sent them to. I wanted to get a endorsement from him. And that is Christoph Waltz,
Ooh.
and yeah, Christoph Waltz. Yeah, for sure. And
As Siegfried?
mhm, yeah.
Really?
You see, the weird thing about Christoph Waltz is, okay, so if you break down every feature, he's not handsome the way Brad Pitt is. Brad Pitt would be interesting because he speaks some German, right?
Yeah.
So he
Yeah.
would be very interesting.
Mhm.
So he's not handsome in the way that Brad Pitt is, but the charm that man has. I mean, they like on screen, there's just something that's
Yeah.
amazing about him.
Yeah.
But he may be too old.
I imagine Siegfried to be softer. I can't think of an actor
Well,
right
that's
now.
because you're thinking of him
Doesn't.
in like Inglorious Bastards, right? You're not, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Anyway,
there are some actors in Babylon.
they can
Berlin.
call me when they start casting, and I'd be happy to share my opinion.
I mean, it's funny whenever when I ask, I had this conversation with the producers, and they go, "Who do you see?" And I would say someone, and they would go, I don't see that at all. And then I would think maybe I've got it wrong. But so it's yeah, Timothy Chalamet for Jack maybe,
Yeah.
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 But then there's a lot of Canadian actors
Or
who I
Tristan.
also think.
Although
Oh,
Tristan
for Tristan,
not
yeah.
a big
I
enough
mean,
part.
if we can go Canadian, then Peter Outerbridge for he's brilliant, and he does he's got a brilliant German accent, and there's just, I think that he would be a great
I can't think of him in anything. I can the name is familiar, but I can't think of
And
a
that's why we have IMDb.
Cool.
Yeah, well, his breakout movie was Paris, France, and
okay.
yeah, and if you pull him up, you will go, oh my god, I see him all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, he looks like Peter O'Toole,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
but younger and more alive.
Younger, yeah. Wow,
Yeah.
that's so exciting. I
There's so many. There's
go
so
on
many.
IMDb
There's
and
so many
start
great actors. I mean, I think that the difficult part will be that I would really like to cast someone with albinism to play Clara and Blanca, and either twins, or do the Dead Ringers thing where there's one great actress who plays both roles.
Yeah.
And that's going to be the hard role to cast. I think that
I see the latter thing being something that happens, because
mhm.
there will be, and I hope there is a push to cast an actress with albinism, because
I would love that.
We should be way beyond casting people who aren't, but anyway. Yeah.
And then someone else would be lovely would be Elliot Page, playing a male role would be quite. I would like that.
Yeah, he could play Jack.
Mhm.
That would be good.
Mhm.
Okay, we digress. I'm already thinking about going on to IMDb and searching out actors between this age and that age to.
The other thing about casting, though, is that it depends on. There's always the mix, right?
Yeah.
And so if you cast Hilda on the young end, then you've got to also cast Siegfried on the young end as well, right? Because they knew each other as kids,
Right.
and so he's a little bit older than her, but you don't want to cast him on the old end or her on the old end and the other one on the younger end. So you either want to age them both up the same, or you want to age them down the same.
Right.
So it's all about that that balance, you know.
Mhm. I totally agree.
I would like my daughter to play Faye.
Right. I already went down that IMDb rabbit hole, so.
Okay.
Kaylee?
I'm just aware of the time.
Okay.
So I think we should move into the raffle next.
Okay. Okay,
We
and I want
started late.
to give, I know. A shout out to Dundurn, who have generously donated 2 copies of Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack. And also for more questions and more opportunity to engage with Heidi, I will let you know that she and I are going to be creating a written version of this, a written, more creative interview of this, which I will be publishing somewhere, and it will be open to comments and open to more questions. When the YouTube video goes up, probably in about an hour, feel free to pose any questions underneath the video, and Heidi will engage, and we can continue the conversation. Just because we're stopping now doesn't mean that we have to stop talking about this great book and stop talking to Heidi. So we've got 2 copies of this book. Kaylee, would you like to do the first raffle?
Yeah, I'm gonna dig around here. All right, and our first winner of the first copy of the book is Laura Robinson.
Yay.
All right, do another one. All right, and our second winner for the night is Libby Lenny.
Yay.
Hey, that's awesome.
So I
Okay,
just want to say that if anyone has a book or has won the book, and if you're doing nothing on October the 10th, I'll be at the Leslieville Farmers Market starting at, I don't know, I think 11 o'clock in the morning, signing copies. Dundurn's going to be selling copies, but I'll be there signing. So if you have a book, bring it and chat to me and hang out. And
that's great. And we will, I'm sure Heidi, you'll share this too, but we'll share information about that on our Facebook page and
Great.
other social media channels. Just before we go, very quickly, because I want to talk about what you're writing right now, not just because I want to sneak peek into the next 2 books, but just very quickly, what you're writing.
Okay, so book 2 is finished. I'm waiting to get some notes.
Yeah.
For book 2, and I've started book 3, and so I've got that first little chunk done. So I've got the setup for both of them, but the setup for the third book, which I was very excited about.
Yeah.
The second book, I can tell you the setup without telling the whole thing. It starts with the twins singing in South Africa for the election of Nelson Mandela, and then in the airport, one of the twins, I'm not saying which one of the twins goes missing, and poof, she's gone. So that's the start of the next book, and then the following book, I can't really say the setup because that would give away the second book.
Yeah.
So I'm doing that, and I'm also helping on the adaptation of Two White Queens and the One-Eyed Jack. So I'll be on the writing team for that.
Oh, nice.
And I am adapting, right now, I am starting to adapt a book by Leslie Cruz called Hits and Misses. So I've got a few screenwriting things that I'm doing as well.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I forgot to mention, just send me an email to junctionwrites@gmail.com.
I did that already.
You did that already? Sorry.
Yeah.
I need more binocular style glasses. Okay, that's it. Heidi, thank you so much
Thank you
for joining Junction Reads. We will be back October 17th with SM Friedman, and October 24th. We've got 2 in a row just because I misbooked the Thanksgiving weekend. So find us on YouTube, Junction Reads, and the video will be up shortly, and you can continue to engage with Heidi. And make sure you're following her on Facebook, and her website, and all of that stuff will be shared for you. Thank you. And again, sorry for the technological issues at the very beginning.
Thank you.
That's all, Heidi. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
You guys, bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Kaylee.